The Seahawks were a big surprise team in 2022 that was slated to begin a rebuild after the Russell Wilson trade, yet they ended up being the real winners of that deal by earning a wildcard berth behind comeback player of the year, Geno Smith. Although they were ousted in the first round of the playoffs by my 49ers, the Hawks weren't as broken as many expected. So they went into last offseason by re-signing Geno Smith to a modest 3-year deal and decided to build around him on both the offense and the defense. They got him a new receiver and a new corner. And so now that there were some expectations for these Seahawks, there's also some pressure on their quarterback and on the overall team to repeat or do better than their unexpected success from the year prior. So when you look at what went right for this team in 2023, you look at the offensive supporting cast. General manager John Snyder did well in last year's draft to get him some help. And receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba. Did I pronounce it right this time? Just kidding. I got it now. And running back Zach Charbonnet. These two rookies did very well with this supporting cast that's led by DK Metcalf, who also had another good year, and Tyler Lockett. So all of them did really well with their quarterback, whether it was Geno or Drew Lock, who had to fill in at times. But this was a pretty solid offense, and coupled with the fact that, again, they got Geno Smith some help, a pretty effective unit. Unfortunately, though, when you look at the Seahawks this past season, Geno Smith took a little bit of a step back. Not to say that it was very bad per se, because he did live up to his contract a little in terms of him being very solid. However, he made some pretty bad decisions with the football, and he took a good amount of sacks, both which killed Seattle's drives, and then he turned the ball over a good amount as well, including him throwing to direct defenses. Yeah, that was a mouthful to say. But anyway, you get the point. Geno Smith, he committed a couple of very ill-advised turnovers, whether it was under pressure or just directly to defenses. Say that a million times. But anyway, aside from my stuttering ass, the defense was still the major weakness, speaking of. Despite their free agent additions and their draft additions, like Bobby Wagner at linebacker, he came back. And then Devin Witherspoon, who they drafted with their first pick. The Seahawks were still getting burned in all facets. Like, it's kind of strange. Despite making all these additions, like on paper, they were still getting burned. Maybe it's like a system issue. And it doesn't help when safety Julian Love, he doesn't have help on his end because Jamal Adams missed a good amount of games with injury. And even when he was in the game, he lost a step. He's been losing steps. Like, he's been getting burned at this point of his career. Also not helping the defense was a pass rush that still couldn't get to the quarterback other than defensive tackle Leonard Williams in his Pro Bowl year. And then when you look at the Seahawks, they underwent another 4-game losing skid. It's not necessarily a 4-game losing skid, but it's another losing skid that ended up hurting them in the long run in terms of the season. Because when you look at weeks 11 to 14 for Seattle, they underwent a losing streak of sorts due to a variety of factors, whether it was poor performance or missing Geno Smith in those games. It was just like, besides their defense, like, and all that, all those losses came against NFC opponents. They even got swept by the 49ers in a 3-week span that knocked them out of the division race. And they were, at one point, out of the playoff race. So even though they did win 2 games against the Eagles and the Titans to get themselves back in that temporary spot at number 7, they cost themselves a valuable chance to solidify that spot in their home finale against the Steelers. Another winnable game for them. So a very costly game for them, because it didn't matter if they beat Arizona the next week, because, well, even if they didn't matter. The Packers went on to beat the Bears at home to get that last spot in the playoffs. So sure, the Seahawks matched their record from 2022, 9-8. Good for them. The problem is, from a deeper standpoint, whether you're a Seahawks fan or not, this season was disappointing because they had their chances to win games that they were supposed to win, and they didn't due to a bad defense. And Geno just took a step back. And it's not to say this is all on Geno Smith, but I feel like the coaching, it was kind of questionable in certain situations. Maybe that was kind of another reason why, Pete Carroll went from the head coach to an advisory role. And they made that switch to go get the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald. That's his name. Like, that was his name. But either way, they hired the Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator to be their new head coach. So maybe that could be the lightning in the bottle that the Seahawks needed to try to stay alive in this going to be a competitive NFC West in 2024. So in terms of 2023, though, they cost themselves. They shot themselves in the foot one too many times in this season. So it's essentially a little bit of a rerun of the prior season in 2022. Only this time, they didn't make the playoffs. So it wasn't bad per se, like for Seattle season, but it also wasn't good either. So I guess it was mid. So looking at their offseason, like I said, you have a new head coach with their former Ravens defensive coordinator. I kind of forgot their name. I'm not sure if it was Mike McDonald. But either way, they have around $12 million to spend initially. Their first round pick is at number 16th overall. So they have some things to consider, like who are they going to re-sign? Their initial list of free agents was Leonard Williams at defensive tackle, linebacker Bobby Wagner, although they did say they're not going to bring him back, guard Damian Lewis, and then tight end Noah Fant. They did re-sign 2 of the 4 here, like Leonard Williams and Noah Fant. They also did commit to quarterback Geno Smith for this season, so I guess that's newsworthy. They released safeties Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. There's a little curious choice there, but maybe they are getting older for the Seahawks. And they did re-sign Tyler Lockett to a new 2-year deal, as well as re-signing, like I said, Noah Fant and Leonard Williams to multi-year deals. So some of the things that the Seahawks still need to address this offseason is, well, they got to get Leonard Williams some help because that pass rush is non-existent. Seattle's front 4 could barely generate any pressure. They really need to commit to both this free agency and the draft to beefing up that entire defensive line, because if they don't, they're going to have trouble stopping the run and getting to the quarterback again this coming fall. And they got to fix up that interior offensive line, because the offensive line wasn't bad as many others I've talked about previously, but it's still a noticeable weakness. Like at right guard, that interior offensive line has had its issue. Like many defenses were able to get to Geno at a very quick rate. So they should look into finding some new guards at both spots to solidify that offensive line. And then last but not least, I think I said this last year when I talked about the Seahawks, you got to consider finding a quarterback to groom for Geno to mentor. Because, like I said, Geno hasn't played bad per se, but when you look at his play this past season and the news of Seahawks committing to him just in 2024, isn't that considered a red flag that they are unsure of Geno long term? So just something to think about. So the Seahawks maybe should consider looking into using one of their day 2 picks to find a possible successor at quarterback whenever Geno fizzles out. So for the Seahawks, they didn't necessarily have a bad season this year. It just wasn't a very exciting nor good one either. Like I said, mid. So the Seahawks going into 2024, when you have the Rams, the Niners, and maybe even the Cardinals, all likely to compete within that division, you have to consider, do you really want more of the same or even less these last 2 years, or maybe even to come this year, going to 2024? It's something to think about as you usher in a new regime going into the Emerald City.